24/7 baby machine, so he can live out his picket fence dream. It's not an act of love if you make her, you make me do too much labor.
That is the feels today. Anyways, hi, hello. How are ya? How you doing? My name is Wendy Ivy Martinez, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read during the month of September and October, because I haven't gone over them. I have 13 books. I read a total of 13 books during the month of September and October. I read very little in September. I read a lot more in October. Yeah. So let's go ahead and get started with those books. So usually I like to organize them by in which order I read them, but I guess because it's different months, I'm just gonna kind of just go and tell you like how I feel about them. So first we're gonna start off with September. The first book that I read was called The Mysteries. This was like a little really short book that I picked up at Barnes & Noble, and this book was okay. Like, I understood the message behind it. In this, you are following this village, right, that has these things called the mysteries, and nobody knows what the mysteries are. And so they finally catch a mystery. They finally catch one of the mysteries, and they're like, oh, that's what they are. And then after that, the mysteries are just kind of forgotten, and life gets boring. And the message behind it is that we need mysteries in life to keep things interesting. And that's the message behind the book, and it was okay. You know what I mean? It was okay. It was an okay read. Some other books that I read during the month of September were one, The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by Mariana Enriquez. This is a collection of short stories written against the backdrop of contemporary Argentina. I really liked these stories a lot. There was only like a couple that I didn't really enjoy, but for the most part, I really enjoyed these stories. They had that feel, like being a Mexican American like woman and growing up on like Hispanic scary stories, like being a Hispanic girl. Like, I'm very superstitious. My family, I was raised to be very superstitious, and I was raised around all these different scary stories. And these short stories gave me that same feel that I would have growing up, and it just felt very nostalgic reading them. So I had a great time. I ended up rating this one 4 out of 5 stars, and I read it during Hispanic Heritage Month. So there's that one. I really enjoyed this one a lot. I will definitely be picking up more from Mariana Enriquez. I really want to read The Shade of Night, and I know she wrote like a few other short story collections, so I'm very interested in those as well. The next book that I read was Monstrillo, or Monstrillo, because that's what they call him in the audiobook, by Gerardo Semana Cordova. And this one is basically kind of like a Frankenstein retelling. In this one, we are following a family who's just lost their son, and the mother kind of like snaps or something, because she literally digs into her son who has just been who has just passed on. He's laying in the bed. She opens him up and takes his lung, because she heard this story of another family member or something like that like started feeding their something about like a body part, and it started to grow. So she's like, I'm gonna try that. His lung kept him alive, so I will keep his lung. And she starts to feed the lung and nurture the lung, and the lung eventually turns into this little creature that we see here that they end up naming Monstrillo or Monstrillo, and they get very attached to it. They know it's not their child, but at the same time they can't help but think that it's their child. And you just basically follow a cast of characters and different point of views from these other people, like not just the mom, not just the dad, but other people that are around this little creature that knows that it's a creature, and their opinions on it. So this book, I really wanted to like this. I really did. I don't know if it's because I listened to the audiobook, and when they would switch point of views, I would genuinely get very confused, because I wouldn't really realize when the point of views were switching. And I went over this in a like reading Hispanic books for Hispanic Heritage Month. And like I kind of talked about my thoughts on this, but I really didn't like this as much as I wanted to. So I rated this one 3 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I wanted to like this. I really did. Maybe like physically reading it would have a different effect on me. So maybe one day I'll read it physically, but as of right now, this is a 3-star for me. Next we have Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is my second Silvia Moreno Garcia book. The first book that I read was called Gods of Jade and Shadow, and I didn't like that one that much, so I was like, I'm gonna give her one more shot, like, let's check it out. Mexican Gothic is one that's like known, is very like beloved among the whole book community, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna check out Mexican Gothic. No. We have this like female who is very empowered, and I did enjoy that aspect of the story. However, where the story went, the things that occurred in the story, there was just something about it. Maybe it's the writing style. I don't know what it is where that disconnect happened, but it just did not work for me. Another one that I really, really wanted to enjoy, especially since this is told in a Mexican setting, and I just did not. So I ended up rating this one 2 out of 5 stars, unfortunately, and that is my take on that one. So those are the books that I read in September. Let's go over the books that I read in October. So the next book that I read, so starting off with this one because it's right here. So this one's going to be coming out in a reading vlog that I have coming out where I read horror books, because I read a lot of them. And this one is Stolen Tongues by Felix Blackwell. This is weird, and this one we are basically following a couple as they go to like winter. They go to this cabin in the woods, right? And the girl, the main character, who is like the newlywed or whatever, or they're like engaged, she's like, yeah, this cabin is like really creepy, and like my parents haven't been here in like a long time, you know, and this is where my nightmares started. But no, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. Sure enough, my friends, they are not fine. They are not fine, because the first night that they go in there, they begin to hear whispers. They begin to hear other people's voices. They begin to hear things all over the cabin. And then something starts walking around the cabin. They eventually leave the cabin. They're like, okay, we are done with this nightmare. But they're not. They're not, because whatever it was that was in the cabin has now followed the fiance female home. And now she is like struggling. And now she is like coming face to face with it constantly. And it just seems to be getting closer and stronger. And we don't know exactly what this thing wants, but it is dangerous. This is like, if you are into mimics, right? This would be something that you would probably really enjoy. Again, this is one that I really wanted to like. When I was reading it physically, I was really into it, but then I switched to the audiobooks just because I was kind of falling behind on my reading vlog, and I don't know again if that's where the disconnect happened, but I was told this was going to be scary. I was told I was not going to be able to sleep. I was told that this was going to be terrifying, and it wasn't. And that's what made me sad. And like the battle, I also feel like it would have had a bigger impact if we were following the point of view of the wife or the newlywed, the fiance, because we would have actually been able to see from a first person's point of view what she is facing, what she is encountering, and it would have been a much more powerful story told in that point of view. But we were not. We were following the fiance male, and his point of view, and him watching his fiance struggle with all these things, and we're following an outsider's point of view, so we didn't really get the impact that I was anticipating to have, the impact that we would have had if we had been in her head. So there's that one, 3 out of 5 stars. So next I read a couple of Junji Ito mangas. I read Soichi by Junji Ito. This has been on my wish list for forever. And then I also read Alley by Junji Ito, and this is his most recent published book in the US. So Junji Ito likes to write short stories and basically put them into collections. In this one, we are following a particular popular character among Junji Ito's short stories. His name is Soichi, and he is this very like weird, quirky kid who likes to put curses on people. And we're just following his different stories, and they all kind of like go hand in hand together, so it does make one big story. And in this one, we are following a collection of random short horror stories. Junji Ito is known as like the master of Japanese horror, and to me, he very in fact is. I love his illustrations. Some can be downright terrifying. I love how he can take the most simple things like balloons, like spirals, and make them scary, just plain scary. And I really enjoyed these two. Soichi, I really enjoyed. I rated both of these 4 out of 5 stars. Soichi's a quirky character. I love that we got to see my personal favorite character, Fuchi, in this. And Ali had a lot of great creepy stories that like stood out to me. So I really enjoyed this one as well. So those are these two. The next book that I read was one that like is being hyped about everywhere. And I picked it up and I was like, okay, I didn't know about the hype until I bought it, and then I realized that everybody else was talking about it. I don't know how I missed that hype up until I picked it up and I was like, oh, this is the book that everyone's talking about. I saw it at Barnes & Noble and I was like, I need this in my life. Now, today, yesterday. And that is The Games Gods Play by Abigail Owen. I really like this story. This one we are following our main character, I've heard Lyra? I believe it's Lyra. I want to say her name's Lyra. I really think her name's Lyra. If I'm wrong, please correct me, but I believe her name is Lyra. And she was basically cursed by Zeus as a baby. And her parents were like, she was cursed by Zeus as a baby to be unlovable. So, of course, because she's unlovable, her parents are like, you know what? We don't want you. They drop her off to like this like thieves guild. She learns to be a thief, and she grows up and she is a thief, and she lives in this world where her pantheon are the Greek gods. But in this world, there are different, like every god, the Norse gods, the Christian gods, they all exist and they all have their own people that they rule over. She happens to be under the Greek pantheon's rule, which I thought was a really cool and unique concept. So every 100 years, the Greek gods have this really huge tournament where they all pick one champion and they throw them and have them go through trials and tribulations, and whoever wins is granted their god is like granted king of the gods for the next 100 years. They also get to rule Olympus for the next 100 years. And not only that, but the person, their champion and their family also gets to live in Olympus for 100 years as well. That means they don't age, they don't die. And I believe they also get one wish granted, if I'm not mistaken. And so Lyra participates in this, and usually one of the gods that never participates is Hades, and Hades has just lost Persephone not too long ago, so he decides for some reason that no one, including the Greek gods, do not understand, to join and try and bring his own champion. And he ends up seeing Lyra try to mess up Zeus's temple, so he's like, that's my champion right there. And he ends up forcing her into these trials, and he offers her a deal. He's like, you win and make me the king of the gods, and I promise I will remove your curse, and you will no longer be unlovable. And so she joins the trials, my friends. She joins the trials, and there is romance and a lot of action. And you know I love me a good Hades romance, but there were a few things that like were a little, you know what I mean? Like, me being a huge fan of Greek mythology, there were a few things that were like just incorrect in the Greek mythology of this. Like, for one, the fact that Hades is called the god of death, and he is not the god of death. He's the god of the dead. Thanatos is a god of death. That was like one thing. There's just a few little things that like irked me, but other than that, I was able to see past it and I had a really great time. I ended up rating this one 5 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it and I cannot wait for the sequel. The next book, probably this is my favorite book of the past 2 months. This is going to be one of my books that come at the top. I know this is going to be in one of my top 10 for the year, and that is Incidents Around the House by Josh Malerman. And this one we are following our main character. She is a little 8-year-old girl named Bella, and Bella has some things going on in her house, okay? She lives a normal life. She has a normal family, but her parents do fight a lot. They do fight a lot. And, you know, her parents do whisper certain things to her when they think she's not listening and she's in bed and she's asleep. But not only that, there is this thing that comes out of her closet in the middle of her night, in the middle of the night, and her name is Other Mommy. And Other Mommy is terrifying. Other Mommy asks Bella all the time one simple question: Bella, can I go into your heart? And thus ensues horrific, like traumatic, scary events that occur, but they're told through an 8-year-old's point of view, and that's what makes it even more scary, because this girl is innocent, because this girl can fully wrap her head or can fully comprehend what exactly is happening. And it's just, it's so good. This one I also listened to with the audiobook, and I highly, highly recommend it that way, because the narrator sounds like a little girl. Her voice literally sounds like a little girl, and it brings the whole story like to life so much more vividly than just physically reading it. In my opinion, I loved this. So 10 out of 10, 5 out of 5. I love this book so much. The next book that I read was probably the worst book of October, and that is I Was a Teenage Slasher by Stephen Graham Jones. And this one we are following the point of view of a teenage slasher as he begins to slash. That's all I can tell you, because that's all that like my brain fully wrapped. Obviously not. My brain is not rapping right now. My brain is not thinking. This book was so confusing. It just made no sense. Anticlimactic. Okay, there's just so many problems that I had with this book. It just made me very sad. Especially how this is my first Stephen Graham Jones book, and I really wanted to like it. I didn't. I can't even tell you why. I just didn't. I was confused. I was bored. I tuned out way too much, and I just didn't like it. So this was I'm gonna give it a 1.5 out of 5 stars. I gave it initially a 2-star, but to be honest, it's like a 1.5. Next book that I read, this one I really did enjoy, and that is The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. This one we are following a Korean American girl, or woman I should say, because she's 18, so she's officially an adult, and her mother her mother's husband, her dad, ends up leaving them, and like he just does not give a rat's cojones that he left his family. So her mom is like broken and lost, and she begins to like serve fish eyes for dinner, and she's like, no, the eyes are the best part, they bring you luck, blah 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 blah. And her mother just kind of like just goes crazy, or just becomes very like, she kind of like tunes out of reality, until finally her mom comes back with this white man named George, and George is absolutely in love with the mother, supposedly, and he also treats his new stepdaughters very, very weird, very, very icky and gross and disgusting, and our main character is done with that. Like, she's like, no. And she slowly becomes the villain, okay? She slowly becomes a serial unaliver. It is a serial unaliver origin story told from a Korean American perspective, who's also a woman on top of that, and I loved it for that. I loved it for that commentary, because you see how she is treated in certain situations because she is a Korean American woman, and like how that impacts her day-to-day life. Okay, it's not just about the slashing and the, you know, it's about the social commentary behind it. And I think now, more than effing ever, people need to read this. People need to read this, especially if you're not used to feeling a certain type of way because of how you look. This is like, you need to read this. Like this just gives you a tiny little glimpse of what it's like. And I loved it because of that. I rated this one a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. The Throne of Glass series is literally just my escape from reality series. You know, it's about a girl who grows up and her people end up being enslaved and taken away. Okay? And now she is working for the most horrible man, okay, that rules the kingdom. And he's effing awful, okay? And he doesn't care about his people. And she eventually causes an uproar. So I need to finish this series now. Especially now. 4 out of 5 stars. So this is like the weakest in the series, Assassin's Blade, but it's still bingeable. You know what I mean? It's still bingeable, but it's the weakest in the series, so that's why this one's a 4 out of 5. The rest are all like 5 out of 5 stars for me. And then last but certainly not least was my disappointment. Another disappointment that I'm very sad about, and that is Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle. I read a book by Chuck Tingle last year, Camp Damascus, and it was literally one of my favorite books of 2023. I put that book on such a pedestal, and I think because of that, I put him on a pedestal. So when I picked this up, I was expecting the absolute perfection that I got from Camp Damascus. And while, yes, this has certain social commentary, it just felt almost like the same story told in a different way. Instead of it being a gay conversion camp, it is a gay film writer, right? Like, but it just felt so similar, and then like the supernatural elements that were added in there were pretty similar as well, and how those worked were pretty similar to the way that it worked in Camp Damascus. You know what I mean? Like, you can get an amazing message across, but it's literally, it felt like, you know, with Ali Hazelwood, like sometimes her books are great, but if you read them back to back, you sort of realize that it's pretty much the same story set with a different set of characters. That's sort of like the feeling that I got with this one, and I was sadly very disappointed by it. It wasn't horrible. It wasn't horrendous. And if I hadn't read Camp Damascus and I didn't have this high expectation, yes, I would have probably enjoyed this a lot more. But here we are. And this was a 3 out of 5 star for me, unfortunately. I liked the concept of it. I just didn't like how eerily similar it was to that story, especially when it came to the direction that everything went was literally the exact same direction that Camp Damascus went to. So there was no shock factor. There was no surprise factor, because I sort of, like, you were like, okay, it's literally the same thing as Camp Damascus. Same story told a little bit differently with a different set of characters and a little bit of different circumstances. That's how it felt. But, so yeah, 3 out of 5 stars. It wasn't terrible. I'm not saying it was terrible. It was still enjoyable. But compared to... it just, yeah. So, that's it, you guys. That is my collection of the books that I read in the past 2 months, September and October, not counting November. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, and I will see you in the next one. Oh, bye!